Hi, it's Tansel here. Now, I wanted to make a video on what I've learnt after memorizing 2 Yellow Pages phone books in only 24 days. And this was something that I didn't set out to do. It was a PR company that actually contacted me and said, Tansel, do you want to memorize a phone book? And initially I looked at the email and I thought, who would want to be able to do that? This is ridiculous. And after a while of thinking about it, and I was about to email saying no, I did some basic calculations in my head and I thought, hang on, if I have a month to memorize it in, which they gave me a whole month, I could possibly do it. So I deleted my no response and said yes. And from then on, they sent me the Yellow Pages phone books and I went to memorization. So what I wanted to talk about was what I learnt from this process and how it could potentially help you, because obviously you're not going to go and memorize phone books, but there's lessons in what I went through, and hopefully you can start to implement some of these things in your life as well, because by implementing them, it's going to help you with whatever you want to achieve, whether it's your career or your daily life and so on. So these lessons, just not for memorization, it's for everything in general. So I really do hope they help you. What was the initial project? So the project was I had to memorize over 2,000 ads from the Sydney Yellow Pages phone books, and there was 2 phone books. Now 2,000 ads, digits for the phone numbers were about 8 to 10 digits. So you're looking at anywhere between 18,000 and 20,000 digits of numbers that I had to memorize. And this was in the space of 1 month. Now it took them, the company, 6 days to send me those Yellow Pages phone books. So it was 24 days I really had to memorize. I had to go through that process. And when I first received those books, I had a look and it was much larger than I expected. It was huge, they were really thick. And I thought, wow, how the hell am I going to do this? This is ridiculous. And what I had to memorize was the business name and the telephone number. And these were for the larger bits of advertising that had pictures in them, right? Because it was more of a campaign to sell those advertisements. So I set together a bit of a plan and thought, okay, what's the best way to memorize phone books? I wasn't going to just start memorizing using a certain technique, right? Otherwise, that's not a good procedure to just get in. You need to be able to know that you can attack something and get it done. So the best way for me to move forward was to create a bit of a plan. And that plan involved how long it took to memorize a particular ad. So in this case, it was business name and let's say 8 digits of their telephone number. Now 8 digits we generally memorize in a few seconds, but I wanted to make sure that if I was to memorize it really well, what's the ceiling? What's the longest it'll take me to memorize? And that figure for me was around 30 seconds. So I said, okay, 30 seconds to memorize a number. And I also gave the equivalent memorization and visualization process to the actual business name as well. So for example, if the business name was Bob's Plumbing, right, I'd make sure that I'd have a really strong visual for Bob's Plumbing. Because what would happen is that I would be tested by recalling the business name. So if they said Bob's Plumbing, I was tested. If someone yelled out Bob's Plumbing, I would say 9722 blah, 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 blah. That had to be a really strong visual for the business name and the number as well as a separate entity. I had to do that. And again, gave the maximum amount of time. Just doing one ad, I got a bit of an idea of how long it would take me for the rest of the ads as well. Now, not every ad is exactly the same. Some have 2 phone numbers, some have 1. In some cases, I memorized the mobile phone number as well as the business phone number. Why I did that, I don't know, but I felt compelled. So I did that in some cases as well. So after creating a bit of a strategy and planning out how long it was going to take, then I had to multiply by the number of ads there were. And like I said, there was around 2,300. And while I worked out that, yes, it might take 30 seconds here, 30 seconds there, again, I had to look at the review process because that was just as important. I wasn't just going to memorize and then hope for the best afterwards, right? Because there were so many ads. So I had to make sure that, okay, hang on, how often do I need to go back and review? So when I was memorizing, I made sure that when I started off, I had to memorize 60 numbers at a time, 60 business numbers, and then do that 4 times over, right? So if it took me an hour to memorize 60 numbers, then I had to go back, review, go back, review, go back, review. Now the review process isn't that long. It's not as long as the memorization, so it will take less than half the time. So it might be 20 minutes maybe for the review, and when next time I did it, maybe 15 minutes and so on. It could be possibly hour and a half, hour 45 that it took me. Yeah, I can't recall from over 10 years ago. This was done in 2010, by the way. So why am I explaining it now? Well, this is really the opportunity I had because I've learned a lot from that time just reflecting back. So I planned that out. Once that was all planned, then I can essentially say, okay, I could do this comfortably within the month, or it was 24 days then, so I had to adjust the numbers. So once I did the planning, then it was just the execution. The execution was the easy part. The planning was very, very difficult. Once I planned it, everything was set, ready to go. Then I started memorizing day one. And what I started doing was I thought, you know what, I have to be accountable to the public, and Twitter was huge back then. So what I started doing was I put day one memorization. This is what I memorized. This is how badly I went, right? And day one was pretty terrible because I memorized about 120 numbers and I pretty much forgot all of them. So I got tested by family members and just couldn't remember them all. And I thought, wow, how am I going to do this? Did the same thing next day as well and forgot most of them. I'm thinking, what's going on? You know, I've used these techniques before, so I've had to readjust my strategies, readjust my techniques, look at how I was doing things. Now, the things that I've learned was that, you know, you have to give yourself enough time and slack to be able to adjust things and go back, because you can plan something perfectly, but if it doesn't go right for you, you're basically, you don't have the time to fix things. So that's what happened to me initially. And I thought, wow, I have to really fix things. So I spent double the time trying to sort that out the next day. So if I was memorizing for 2 hours, 4 hours a day, the next day I had to do 8 hours to try and fix up a lot of the mistakes. And how I fixed that up was I initially used, and I think I've explained this to you guys before, is use Smash and Scope. So it's on my YouTube channel if you want to check that out. So I use my senses, use, you know, imagination, color, associate, all that sort of stuff. So I really delved deep into the memorization process, and that helped a lot more as well. So it wasn't just you know, creating linking stories and whatnot. It was getting deep into memorization. So I learned how to become a better memorizer just through the process of making a lot of mistakes. Yeah, so I found out that I wasn't very disciplined in my approach, because if I'd mess up something or I wasn't memorizing that day, because there were times where I wasn't memorizing every day, then I had to double the next day as well. And I remember there was a time where I was actually memorizing for 10 hours, not straight. I was doing everything in 2-hour chunks, but still, very long time using these techniques to memorize. I had the yellow pages in front of me, so it was a physical book, and you know, I was turning over the pages, you know, my fingers went yellow, the white table went yellow, so it was quite extraordinary. So I learned that I wasn't that disciplined, so I had to keep up and create some sort of a habit of getting onto the right time to memorize. So sometimes I got up at 4 a.m., sometimes I did it at 12 p.m. during my lunch breaks, and I was working at the time as well. So in most cases, I was in the car park memorizing because there were no meeting rooms to actually memorize in because they were all full. And that wasn't working that well. So I had to leave work for a couple of weeks while I focused on building habits and memorizing at the right time and so on. I learned that I wasn't quite disciplined, but obviously got over that. Time management wasn't great, but once you start developing habits, that was great as well. And initially when I started, I've generally got a positive mindset, but once I forgot those numbers the first couple of days, my mind started wandering. I thought, what the hell's going on? You know, I'm going to have to recite these to the public, to the media. So I got really scared, thinking that I wasn't going to be able to do it. What did I get myself into? Just that fear made me work even harder not to make mistakes. Yes, we are human at the end of the day. We make mistakes, and I did end up making a couple of mistakes at the end, but just that initial fear made me drive myself even further, made me get up at 4 a.m. even though I wasn't a morning person, made me work for 10 hours a day because of that fear of what if I mess up on TV where there's millions of viewers, and there was. That got me changing my mindset around, and when that was changed around, I was just focused on just executing perfectly. And if I could execute perfectly, the results take care of themselves, which is what exactly happened. I moved towards more positive mindset. I haven't talked about memorization much. That's because it wasn't really a memorization exercise for me. Yes, the whole thing, memorizing the phone book, is a memorization exercise, but what I got out of it was an exercise in discipline, exercise in time management, an exercise in mindset, an exercise in stress and anxiety, all those things. Memorization was the easy part because all I had to do was just execute the techniques after I'd fixed them up, and that was it. So from a memorization point of view, yeah, it was a challenge, but all those other things that I talked to you about, that was the real challenge. I guess my story here is not just about memorization. It's about, well, what could you do if you're in a situation where you've presented a challenge? What could you do? And some of the skills, again, that I learned was these discipline and time management and so on. So the big thing that I learned, again, was probably about accountability. That fear came into me, and I was driven by fear. Now, a lot of you might be driven by fear. A lot of you might be driven by excitement and the future success. There's no wrong or right way. It's whatever works for you. I've had a lot of my clients that were fear-based motivated, and a lot of my other clients that were, I can't wait to, smash these goals, get really excited, and that's what, wakes them up in the morning. That's what gets them to achieve their goals because of the excitement. In this case, it was fear for me because I didn't want to look like an idiot in front of everyone. And then once we had all the TV stations started recording and making videos and testing me, and it was fine. I was recalling them. Not every single ad because, it'll take a very long time to recall every single ad. But what they did do was just pick randomly from the Yellow Pages phone book and test me, which is very difficult because I didn't necessarily memorize in order. I didn't use a memory palace. If you're interested about how I memorized it, all I did was linking. So I'll probably make that in another video on how I actually memorized the phone book. I've written about it before and even in my books, but I think a video will be handy because a lot of people watch these videos. The lessons taken from all of this is get yourself a really solid plan, strategy, create a bit of slack in there because if things don't go to plan, you can work towards building stuff in there. So keep it flexible, manage your time a lot better, and the best way to do that is try and get some habits. That's why there's a lot of talk about successful habits and so on, and I've written about it a lot in my books. Stack the habits together. So, one of the habits that I had was, walking quite a bit, but I wasn't reading much. So it's like, let's put them together. So every time I was walking, I was essentially reading and reading 3-4 books a week. Things like that you can do with your habit stacking, and your time management and so on. Discipline is a very difficult thing, but once you're put on the spot and you've got a challenge, sometimes it takes something really, really difficult like that to kick you up your butt and going, you know what, let's test you, see how you go. So if you want that kind of stuff, give yourself a challenge. Do people need a challenge? No. You see a lot of people saying, oh, you need that challenge, to move forward, whatever. I don't believe so. This is just something that I learned all these skills from. Again, you can learn in so many different ways, but hopefully you can learn from what I've learned and apply them in your daily life as well and improve in areas that you never thought you would. That's it from me. Quick video from me today. And if you have any questions, anything like that, feel free to comment down below and I'll be happy to help you. Cheers.